The morning sun cast long shadows across camp, Thunderbolt's training grounds, when Staff Sergeant Murphy called out the day's jump roster. Names echoed across the assembly area as elite paratroopers prepared for another round of high-altitude exercises. But when he reached the medical station, his voice took on a different tone. "Novak, your ground support again today. Equipment check and standby only. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Elena Novak nodded from behind her clipboard, her medical officer uniform crisp and unremarkable among the sea of tactical gear surrounding her. She'd heard those words every day for the past 3 weeks since arriving at the Special Operations training facility. While hardened commandos prepared to leap from aircraft at 15,000 feet, she remained firmly planted on solid ground, relegated to monitoring radio communications and checking emergency medical supplies. The dismissive glances weren't new either. Tough-as-nails operators who could infiltrate enemy compounds and survive behind hostile lines had little patience for support personnel who couldn't handle the basic requirements of airborne operations. To them, Elena represented everything. Soft about modern military bureaucracy, a desk-bound medical officer who'd probably faint at the sight of blood, let alone the prospect of jumping out of a perfectly good aircraft. Corporal Jenkins finished strapping on his parachute and glanced over at Elena with barely concealed amusement. "Hey Doc, sure you don't want to give it a try today? We could start you off with a nice tandem jump, real gentle-like." His squad mates chuckled as they performed their equipment checks, the kind of good-natured ribbing that barely masked their genuine bewilderment at having someone on base who was afraid of heights. Elena managed a weak smile and shook her head. "I'll stick to keeping you all patched up when you land, thanks." Her voice carried just the right amount of nervous uncertainty, the tone of someone who'd clearly never belonged in a combat environment. It was a performance she'd perfected over years of practice, so convincing that even she sometimes forgot it was an act. The truth was considerably more complex than anyone at Camp Thunderbolt could imagine. Elena Novak was indeed a medical officer, but her credentials extended far beyond battlefield medicine. Hidden beneath her unremarkable exterior was a background in high-altitude physiology, extreme environment survival, and combat medicine that would have impressed even the most seasoned Special Operations veterans. More importantly, she possessed skills in unconventional infiltration techniques that made traditional parachuting look pedestrian by comparison. As the morning progressed and training exercises began in earnest, Elena maintained her position at the medical station, monitoring radio traffic and tracking aircraft movements. But her attention wasn't focused on routine training protocols. Instead, she was analyzing wind patterns, studying topographical maps, and calculating variables that had nothing to do with standard medical support duties. Her seemingly casual observations of aircraft approach angles and jump zone conditions revealed a depth of technical knowledge that would have raised questions if anyone had been paying attention. Lieutenant Colonel Walsh, the base commander, approached the medical station during a brief break between training rotations. He'd been observing Elena for several days now, trying to reconcile something that didn't quite add up about their newest support officer. Her medical qualifications were impeccable, her references beyond reproach, but there was something in the way she moved, the way she assessed situations, that suggested combat experience rather than hospital rotations. "How are you settling in, Dr. Novak?" Walsh asked, using her civilian title rather than her military rank. It was a subtle test, one that most actual medical officers would correct immediately. Elena simply nodded acknowledgement, neither embracing nor rejecting the designation. Another small anomaly in a growing list of inconsistencies. "Very well, sir. The facility is impressive. Your teams are clearly operating at an exceptional level." Elena's response was professional and appropriate, But Walsh noticed how her eyes continued scanning the horizon, even while speaking with him. It was the habit of someone accustomed to monitoring multiple threat vectors simultaneously, not the behavior of a support officer focused solely on medical concerns. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior non-commissioned officer responsible for training operations, had his own concerns about the mysterious medical officer. During his 20-year career, he'd worked with hundreds of support personnel, and Elena Novak didn't fit any familiar pattern. She asked too many questions about operational procedures, showed too much interest in equipment specifications, and demonstrated an uncanny ability to predict training outcomes before they occurred. "Something's off about the doc," Rodriguez mentioned quietly to Walsh during their afternoon briefing. "Yesterday she warned me about potential equipment failure on aircraft, 7 before our maintenance team had even identified the problem. When I asked how she knew, she claimed it was just a lucky guess based on engine sound patterns. But sir, she was standing 200 yards away from the aircraft when she made that observation." The afternoon brought new mysteries when Elena volunteered to assist with equipment inventory, a task that typically fell to logistics specialists rather than medical personnel. She moved through the parachute packing area with surprising familiarity, her hands briefly pausing over various pieces of gear in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of their function and limitations. When she stopped to examine a damaged reserve chute, her assessment was both immediate and accurate, identifying stress points and failure mechanisms that should have been beyond her expertise. Sergeant Martinez, responsible for parachute maintenance, watched Elena's impromptu inspection with growing curiosity. "Doc, you seem to know your way around this gear pretty well for someone who doesn't jump." His comment was casual, but his eyes were sharp, studying her reaction carefully. Elena looked up from the damaged equipment with what appeared to be mild embarrassment. "I've read extensively about parachute systems as part of my medical training. Understanding the equipment helps me better treat injuries when things go wrong." It was a plausible explanation, technically accurate, but somehow insufficient to explain the depth of practical knowledge she just demonstrated. As evening approached and training operations wound down, Elena found herself alone in the equipment bay, ostensibly conducting routine medical supply inventory. But her true purpose was far more complex. She was systematically examining every piece of specialized gear in the facility, from standard military parachutes to exotic high-altitude breathing apparatus, building a comprehensive understanding of available resources that went far beyond medical necessity. Her encrypted satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message, the first communication she'd received since arriving at Camp Thunderbolt. The text was brief and coded, but its meaning was unmistakable. Intelligence sources had identified a high-value target being held in a remote facility 600 miles away, accessible only through terrain that conventional rescue operations couldn't reach. The mission parameters were impossible by normal standards, requiring infiltration techniques that existed more in theory than practice. Elena studied the mission details with the calm focus of someone who'd been expecting this moment. The target zone was surrounded by mountainous terrain that made helicopter insertion impossible and parachute deployment deadly due to unpredictable wind shear and minimal landing space. Traditional special operations doctrine would classify the location as unreachable, but Elena knew better. She'd spent years developing and perfecting techniques that made the impossible merely dangerous. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3 weeks, she'd maintained the fiction of being unable to handle standard parachute operations while secretly preparing for a mission that would require her to jump without any parachute at all. Her colleagues at Camp Thunderbolt had dismissed her as a liability in combat situations, never suspecting that she possessed skills that made their elite training look elementary by comparison. As she prepared to leave the equipment bay, Elena paused to look back at the rows of neatly arranged parachutes, each one representing the conventional wisdom about how human beings could safely transit from aircraft to ground. Tomorrow she would prove that convention was merely another limitation to be overcome by those willing to redefine the boundaries of possible. The woman they thought couldn't handle a simple parachute jump was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most dangerous missions required abandoning safety equipment entirely. The stage was set for a revelation that would shatter every assumption her colleagues had made about the quiet medical officer who preferred to keep her feet on solid ground. The next morning brought an unusual tension to Camp Thunderbolt that had nothing to do with scheduled training exercises. Lieutenant Colonel Walsh had spent most of the night reviewing Elena Novak's personnel file, and the deeper he dug, the more questions arose. Her medical credentials were legitimate, her security clearance properly documented, but something about her background felt carefully constructed rather than naturally developed. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached Walsh's office carrying a tablet loaded with security footage from the previous evening. "Sir, you need to see this." The medical officer was in the equipment bay until nearly midnight, supposedly conducting inventory, but watch her movements carefully. The footage showed Elena moving through the facility with the precise efficiency of someone conducting reconnaissance rather than routine supply checks. Her path through the equipment areas followed patterns that suggested tactical assessment rather than medical inventory. Meanwhile, Elena had received additional intelligence about her pending mission that made her situation increasingly precarious. The target was a captured American intelligence operative being held in a mountain fortress that conventional rescue operations couldn't reach. Time was critical, as enemy forces were preparing to move the prisoner to a more secure location within 48 hours. The window for intervention was closing rapidly, and Elena remained the only asset positioned to attempt the impossible rescue. Sergeant Martinez had been conducting his own investigation into Elena's background, motivated by curiosity about her unexpected knowledge of parachute systems. His contacts in military personnel records had provided disturbing information. Elena Novak's service record showed deployment to classified locations that didn't match her stated medical assignments, training certifications that seemed excessive for a standard medical officer, and gaps in her timeline that suggested involvement in operations that weren't officially documented. The morning briefing brought new complications when Walsh announced that a surprise inspection team would be arriving from headquarters within hours. The timing was suspicious, suggesting that someone higher up the chain of command had concerns about personnel security at Camp Thunderbolt. Elena maintained her composed exterior during the announcement, but internally she recognized the signs of a security investigation that was closing in on her carefully maintained cover identity. Corporal Jenkins noticed Elena's subtle change in demeanor during the briefing and mentioned it to Rodriguez afterward. "Sarge, the doc seemed different today." Like she was listening for something specific when the colonel mentioned the inspection team. Most support personnel would be worried about getting their paperwork in order, but she looked like she was calculating tactical options. The inspection team arrived earlier than scheduled, led by a stern intelligence officer who immediately began requesting access to personnel files and security footage. Major Harrison from military intelligence had the kind of sharp, analytical gaze that missed nothing, and Elena could feel his attention focusing on her within minutes of his arrival. She continued her routine medical duties, but the weight of scrutiny was becoming difficult to ignore. Elena's encrypted communication device delivered another urgent message during lunch break. Intelligence sources had confirmed that the captured operative possessed information critical to national security, and enemy interrogation techniques were intensifying. The mission timeline had accelerated, requiring immediate action rather than the careful preparation Elena had been conducting. She was being ordered to abort her cover and execute the rescue operation within 24 hours. Major Harrison approached Elena at the medical station with a casualness that fooled no one. "Dr. Novak, I'd like to review some of your recent Medical reports. Standard procedure during facility inspections. His request was phrased politely, but Elena recognized the tone of someone gathering evidence rather than conducting routine administrative review. Her carefully maintained cover was beginning to unravel under professional scrutiny. The afternoon training exercise provided Elena with an opportunity to observe the inspection team's methods and assess the level of suspicion she was facing. Harrison and his team were systematically interviewing personnel about their interactions with the medical officer, asking specific questions about her knowledge and behavior that went far beyond routine security protocols. The investigation was focused and thorough, suggesting they had specific concerns about her identity rather than general security worries. Rodriguez pulled Walsh aside during a break between interviews. "Sir, I think we need to consider the possibility that our medical officer isn't who she claims to be. The intelligence team is asking very specific questions about unconventional warfare training and infiltration techniques. Those aren't topics that come up during standard personnel reviews." Elena realized that her window for maintaining cover was closing rapidly when she overheard Martinez discussing her parachute equipment knowledge with one of the inspection team members. Her expertise had been too visible, her questions too informed, her observations too accurate for someone supposedly afraid of jumping. The careful facade she'd maintained was cracking under the weight of accumulated evidence and professional investigation. The crisis reached a breaking point when Elena's secure communication device activated with maximum priority alert signals during the evening meal. The captured operative had been moved ahead of schedule and was now being transported through a narrow mountain pass that represented the last opportunity for rescue before he disappeared into an impenetrable fortress complex. The mission timeline had collapsed from hours to minutes, requiring immediate action regardless of cover security. Major Harrison was studying personnel files in Walsh's office when alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency communication protocols activated as reports came in about the accelerated prisoner transport and the narrow window for intervention. Elena listened to the tactical briefings with growing awareness that her moment of decision had arrived. She could maintain her cover and watch an American operative disappear forever, or reveal her true capabilities and attempt a rescue that would expose everything she'd been hiding. Walsh received direct communication from headquarters confirming the emergency situation and authorizing any available assets for immediate rescue operations. The problem was that no conventional assets could reach the target location in time. Helicopter insertion was impossible due to weather conditions, and parachute deployment into the mountain terrain would be suicide for normally trained personnel. The mission appeared impossible using standard military capabilities. Elena made her choice when she heard Walsh explaining to Major Harrison that they had no viable options for reaching the prisoner transport. She approached the command post where senior officers were studying maps and shaking their heads at the impossible geography. "Sir, I can reach that location." Her voice carried new authority that immediately captured everyone's attention. Walsh looked up from the tactical display with confusion. "Doctor, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this isn't a medical mission. We're discussing combat extraction from hostile territory." Elena's response changed everything anyone at camp. Thunderbolt thought they knew about their quiet medical officer. "Colonel, with respect, you're discussing my specialty." Major Harrison leaned forward with sharp interest. "Your specialty, Doctor? I was under the impression you were afraid to make standard parachute jumps." Elena met his gaze directly, her careful mask finally dropping completely. "I'm not afraid of parachutes, Major. I don't need them." The revelation hit the room like a physical impact. Rodriguez stared at Elena with dawning comprehension, finally understanding why her equipment knowledge had seemed so extensive. Martinez realized that her questions about parachute limitations hadn't been academic curiosity, but professional assessment of tools she considered inadequate for her purposes. Walsh began connecting the pieces of inconsistent behavior that had troubled him since Elena's arrival. Elena continued speaking with the calm confidence of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. The target location is accessible using high-altitude insertion techniques that don't require parachute deployment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I can reach the prisoner transport and extract the operative, but it means revealing capabilities that are supposed to remain classified. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Major Harrison's expression shifted from suspicion to amazement. You're not a medical officer conducting security breaches. You're an asset conducting security assessment. Elena nodded slowly. And now I'm an asset conducting emergency rescue operations. The pieces of Elena Novak's true identity were finally falling into place, but the complete picture was more extraordinary than anyone at Camp Thunderbolt could have imagined. The woman they'd dismissed as afraid of heights was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous missions required abandoning conventional equipment entirely. Within minutes of Elena's revelation, the command post at Camp Thunderbolt transformed into a crisis response center. Walsh immediately ordered secure communication lines open to Pentagon operations, while Elena began explaining insertion techniques that sounded impossible to everyone listening. She outlined a high-altitude approach that would use natural mountain thermals and precision body positioning to achieve controlled descent without any traditional safety equipment. Major Harrison studied Elena with newfound respect and growing concern. Major Novak, because I assume that's your actual rank, what you're describing sounds like a suicide mission disguised as tactical innovation. Elena shook her head calmly as she spread topographical maps across the command table. Sir, what I'm describing is the only viable option for reaching the prisoner transport before it disappears into the fortress complex. Rodriguez and Martinez exchanged glances as Elena began marking wind patterns and descent trajectories on the maps with the precision of someone who'd performed similar calculations hundreds of times before. Her transformation from nervous medical officer to confident special operations planner was so complete that it left the assembled personnel struggling to reconcile the two versions of the same person they'd witnessed. Elena's fingers traced elevation lines and geographical features as she explained her approach. The mountain pass creates a natural wind tunnel that conventional wisdom says makes parachute deployment impossible. But those same wind patterns can be used for controlled descent if you understand how to position your body to ride the air currents rather than fight them. Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years perfecting techniques that existed nowhere in standard military doctrine. Walsh authorized immediate aircraft preparation while Elena requisitioned specialized equipment that most personnel had never seen before. Instead of traditional parachutes, she selected high-altitude breathing apparatus, advanced GPS tracking systems, and communication gear designed for extreme environment operations. Each piece of equipment revealed new layers of her hidden expertise and suggested missions that had never been officially documented. The weather briefing provided additional challenges that would have deterred conventional rescue attempts. Mountain winds were gusting at dangerous speeds, visibility was limited due to cloud cover, and the terrain featured rocky outcroppings that would be fatal for anyone making navigational errors during descent. Elena listened to the meteorological data with the focused attention of someone calculating precise entry points and timing sequences. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached Elena as she completed her equipment check. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology." "We all do, but I have to ask, how many times have you done this before?" Elena paused in her preparations, considering how much truth she could reveal. "Sergeant, let's just say that conventional parachute training felt restrictive after learning what's actually possible." The transport aircraft was a modified reconnaissance plane capable of high-altitude flight over the target zone. Elena coordinated with the pilot to establish precise approach vectors that would position her for optimal insertion while avoiding enemy radar detection. Her navigation calculations incorporated variables that standard military planning rarely considered, including atmospheric pressure differentials and thermal updraft patterns. As the aircraft climbed toward insertion altitude, Elena maintained radio contact with ground control while monitoring enemy communication intercepts. Intelligence updates confirmed that the prisoner transport was proceeding through the mountain pass on schedule, providing a narrow window for intervention. The captured operative's location had been pinpointed to a specific vehicle in the convoy, requiring precision targeting that left no margin for error. Elena stood at the aircraft's open door, studying the terrain far below with the calm focus of someone who'd made similar leaps countless times before. The mountain landscape looked impossibly hostile, with jagged peaks and narrow valleys that offered few safe landing options. To the pilot and aircraft crew, her planned descent looked like an elaborate suicide attempt rather than a tactical operation. The moment of insertion arrived with Elena positioned at the aircraft's threshold, her body poised for a controlled fall that would cover 6 miles of vertical distance before reaching the target zone. She turned briefly to acknowledge the crew members who were watching with a mixture of awe and terror. "Gentlemen, this is where conventional wisdom ends and real capability begins." Elena stepped into the void without hesitation, her body immediately assuming the precise positioning required for high-altitude navigation. Instead of the desperate free fall that observers expected, her descent followed calculated trajectories that used wind resistance and air current patterns to control both speed and direction. She moved through the sky with the fluid grace of someone who'd mastered three-dimensional navigation in ways that traditional parachutists never achieved. The first phase of descent carried Elena through cloud layers that would have disoriented conventional jumpers, but her training included navigation techniques that relied on atmospheric pressure changes and gravitational orientation rather than visual references. She monitored her GPS coordinates while making minute adjustments to body position that kept her on course toward the mountain pass where the enemy convoy was traveling. As Elena emerged from the cloud cover, the enemy transport column became visible far below, a line of vehicles moving through terrain that conventional rescue operations couldn't reach. Her approach angle positioned her for direct insertion near the target vehicle while avoiding the defensive positions that enemy forces had established at regular intervals along the mountain road. The final phase of Elena's descent required the most precise body control as she navigated between rocky outcroppings that would have shredded traditional parachutes. Her technique involved using the mountain's wind patterns to slow her descent, while maintaining directional control through subtle shifts in body positioning. She landed silently in dense forest cover less than 100 yards from the convoy route. Elena immediately activated her communication gear to confirm successful insertion while moving toward the target vehicle. Her infiltration training included techniques for approaching moving convoys through terrain that provided minimal concealment options. She tracked the enemy transport through dense undergrowth, waiting for the optimal moment to execute prisoner extraction. The captured operative was being held in the third vehicle of a 5-truck convoy, surrounded by armed guards who were maintaining high alert status due to the strategic importance of their prisoner. Elena studied their movement patterns and communication protocols, while calculating extraction options that would minimize casualties and maximize escape probability. Elena's opportunity came when the convoy stopped to navigate a particularly treacherous section of mountain road. She approached the target vehicle using stealth techniques that allowed her to neutralize sentries without alerting the main force. Her training included close-quarters combat methods specifically designed for hostage rescue in confined spaces. The prisoner extraction itself required precise timing as Elena disabled vehicle security systems and eliminated guards, while the captured operative remained unconscious from enemy interrogation drugs. She administered medical countermeasures to revive him while establishing defensive positions that would allow them to hold off enemy reinforcements until backup arrived. Elena's emergency communication to Camp Thunderbolt confirmed successful prisoner recovery and requested immediate extraction support. Her GPS coordinates placed them in terrain that helicopters couldn't reach, requiring ground-based rescue operations that would take hours to organize. She prepared defensive positions while monitoring enemy response patterns and calculating survival options. The rescue succeeded when Elena guided ground support teams through mountain terrain that conventi navigation said was impassable. Her knowledge of the area's geography and tactical possibilities enabled extraction routes that brought both her and the recovered operative to safety despite overwhelming enemy advantages. The return to Camp Thunderbolt brought revelations that completely transformed how everyone viewed Elena Novak. Walsh learned that she held classified credentials for missions that officially didn't exist, while Rodriguez discovered that her equipment knowledge came from field experience rather than academic study. Martinez realized that her questions about parachute limitations reflected professional expertise that exceeded anything taught in conventional military training. Elena's debrief revealed the existence of specialized units that operated beyond traditional military doctrine, using techniques that pushed human capability far beyond accepted limitations. Her assignment to Camp Thunderbolt had been cover for assessing facility readiness to support unconventional operations when standard approaches proved inadequate. The captured operative's intelligence proved critical to preventing attacks that would have cost countless American lives. Elena's impossible rescue had succeeded not just in saving one person, but in protecting national security interests that extended far beyond the mountain fortress where conventional wisdom said rescue was impossible. Major Harrison's final report classified Elena's mission as a successful demonstration of capabilities that expanded military understanding of what could be achieved when traditional limitations were abandoned in favor of advanced training and tactical innovation. Her techniques would influence special operations doctrine for years to come. Elena remained at Camp Thunderbolt to train other personnel in unconventional infiltration methods, transforming from a supposedly timid medical officer into an instructor whose expertise redefined what elite soldiers thought was possible. Her legend spread throughout special operations communities as proof that the most dangerous missions sometimes required abandoning safety equipment entirely. The woman who supposedly couldn't handle parachutes had proven that sometimes the greatest achievements required transcending conventional tools and techniques. Elena Novak became living proof that true capability often hides behind carefully maintained facades, waiting for the moment when impossible becomes necessary. 3 months after Elena's impossible rescue mission, the Pentagon had quietly established the most classified training program in military history. The Apex Initiative operated from a remote facility in the Nevada mountains, where conventional military doctrine was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt around techniques that most senior officers still considered theoretical impossibilities. Elena found herself at the center of a revolution in special operations, thinking that would reshape how America approached its most dangerous missions. The facility itself resembled a cross between a research laboratory and an extreme sports training center. Wind tunnels designed to simulate high-altitude atmospheric conditions occupied vast chambers where Elena worked with aerospace engineers to perfect descent techniques that had previously existed only in her mind. Computer modeling systems analyzed every aspect of human aerodynamics, while specialized equipment tested the absolute limits of what trained personnel could survive without traditional safety measures. Elena's first students were handpicked volunteers from elite special operations units, each selected for psychological profiles that indicated exceptional adaptability and willingness to abandon conventional thinking. These weren't typical military trainees seeking to improve existing skills, but rather exceptional individuals being prepared to redefine what human capability could achieve when properly directed and rigorously trained. Captain Sarah Chun, a former Navy SEAL who had volunteered for the program after hearing whispered stories about Elena's mountain rescue, struggled with techniques that seemed to violate every principle of safe military practice. During her third week of training, she watched Elena demonstrate a controlled descent from 8,000 feet using nothing but precise body positioning and atmospheric pressure differentials. The physics made sense in theory, but watching it happen challenged everything Chun thought she understood about human limitations. The training regimen Elena developed pushed students through progressively more challenging scenarios that systematically eliminated their dependence on traditional safety equipment. Early exercises focused on advanced swimming techniques that allowed personnel to survive in conditions where conventional gear would be fatal. Students learned to navigate underwater obstacles while holding their breath for periods that exceeded standard human endurance, developing lung capacity and oxygen efficiency that bordered on superhuman. Elena's methods incorporated elements of extreme altitude acclimatization that enabled students to function effectively at elevations where normal human physiology would fail. The training included controlled exposure to atmospheric conditions that gradually expanded respiratory and circulatory capabilities, allowing personnel to operate without supplemental oxygen at heights that would incapacitate conventionally trained soldiers. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the chief medical officer overseeing the APEX initiative, documented physiological changes in students that challenged established understanding of human adaptation limits. After 6 months of Elena's training, test subjects demonstrated cardiovascular efficiency improvements of over 40%, lung capacity increases that exceeded anything previously recorded, and neurological adaptations that enhanced spatial orientation and crisis response beyond normal human ranges. The psychological conditioning proved equally demanding as students learned to function effectively while experiencing fear levels that would paralyze untrained individuals. Elena's techniques involved controlled exposure to increasingly dangerous situations that gradually expanded comfort zones until students could maintain tactical thinking while facing circumstances that conventional wisdom classified as unsurvivable. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, an Army Ranger who had initially joined the program seeking advanced parachute training, found himself learning to navigate three-dimensional environments without any external reference points. Elena's methods taught students to use internal sensory systems for navigation that most people never developed, including equilibrium awareness that enabled precise movement in complete darkness and gravitational orientation that functioned independently of visual confirmation. The program's existence remained so classified that most Pentagon officials knew only that unconventional capabilities were being developed without understanding specific techniques or applications. Elena worked directly with a small group of senior commanders who possessed clearance levels that allowed access to information about capabilities that officially didn't exist within American military doctrine. General Patricia Hayes, who oversaw special operations development at the highest levels, visited the Nevada facility to observe Elena's training methods firsthand. What she witnessed challenged fundamental assumptions about military capability that had guided American defense planning for decades. Students were accomplishing insertion missions in terrain that conventional doctrine declared impossible to reach, demonstrating survival skills in environments that should have been fatal, and executing extraction operations under conditions that exceeded anything previously attempted. Elena's program expanded beyond individual capability development to include team coordination, techniques that enabled small units to function effectively in environments where traditional military equipment would be useless. Students learned communication methods that worked in conditions where electronic systems failed, navigation techniques that functioned when GPS signals were unavailable, and survival strategies that enabled extended operations without supply. Chain support. The first operational deployment of Apex Initiative personnel occurred when intelligence sources identified a terrorist cell operating from a remote location in the Hindu Kush Mountains that conventional forces couldn't reach. Elena personally led a 4-person team that inserted without aircraft support, traversed 60 miles of impossible terrain in 3 days, and eliminated the target while recovering intelligence that prevented multiple planned attacks on American cities. The mission's success prompted immediate expansion of the Apex program, with Elena recruiting additional instructors who possessed specialized knowledge in areas that complemented her atmospheric insertion expertise. Master Sergeant David Park, a former Marine reconnaissance specialist, joined the program to develop underwater infiltration techniques that enabled personnel to approach targets through water systems that traditional diving equipment couldn't. Navigate. Elena's underwater training methods taught students to function effectively at depths and for durations that exceeded conventional safety limits. By developing breathing techniques borrowed from free diving combined with pressure adaptation, protocols that gradually expanded physiological tolerance, students learned to navigate underwater cave systems, approach maritime targets through hostile waters, and execute extraction operations in aquatic environments where traditional equipment would be detected or would fail due to environmental conditions. The program also incorporated advanced mountaineering techniques that enabled personnel to traverse vertical terrain without conventional climbing equipment. Elena worked with rock climbing specialists to develop hand and foot placement methods that provided secure purchase on surfaces that appeared smooth to untrained observers, allowing students to scale sheer cliff faces that conventional wisdom declared unclimbable. Captain Jennifer Walsh, daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Walsh from Camp Thunderbolt, volunteered for the Apex program after hearing her father's stories about Elena's capabilities. The younger Walsh possessed natural climbing ability that Elena refined into techniques capable of ascending ice-covered vertical surfaces using only hand placement and specialized gripping methods that generated sufficient friction for secure movement. Elena's training philosophy emphasized understanding environmental conditions so thoroughly that students could identify and exploit natural phenomena that conventional training ignored. Students learned to recognize wind patterns that could assist or hinder movement, temperature differentials that indicated safe passage routes, and atmospheric pressure changes that signaled weather developments hours before they became apparent to standard meteorological observation. The psychological transformation of students proved as significant as their physical capability development. Elena's methods produced personnel who remained calm and analytical while facing circumstances that would terrify conventionally trained soldiers. Students developed decision-making capabilities that functioned effectively under extreme stress, maintaining tactical thinking while experiencing fear levels that would incapacitate normal individuals. Dr. Susan Chun, a military psychologist studying the Apex program, documented personality changes in students that indicated fundamental shifts in how they perceived risk and capability. After completing Elena's training, subjects demonstrated confidence levels in extreme situations that exceeded anything previously measured, combined with realistic assessment of danger that prevented reckless behavior despite their enhanced capabilities. The program's success attracted attention from intelligence agencies seeking personnel capable of operations that conventional special forces couldn't attempt. Elena found herself training CIA operatives, NSS specialists, and personnel from agencies so classified that their existence wasn't officially acknowledged, each requiring capabilities tailored to specific mission parameters that pushed human performance beyond established limits. Elena's work with intelligence operatives involved developing cover identities that could withstand scrutiny while providing access to locations and information that traditional espionage methods couldn't reach. Students learned to maintain fake personas so convincingly that even sophisticated background investigations would confirm their fictional histories, enabling deep insertion into hostile organizations without detection. The training included language acquisition techniques that enabled students to achieve native-level fluency in multiple languages within months rather than years, combined with cultural immersion methods that developed instinctive understanding of social dynamics in foreign environments. Students could blend seamlessly into local populations, while gathering intelligence and executing operations that conventional spies couldn't approach. Colonel Harrison, the intelligence officer who had investigated Elena at Camp Thunderbolt, joined the APEX program as a liaison between conventional military structures and the revolutionary capabilities Elena was developing. His role involved identifying missions where APEX-trained personnel could achieve objectives that traditional approaches couldn't accomplish, while maintaining operational security that protected the program's existence from hostile intelligence services. Elena's relationship with Harrison evolved from mutual suspicion to professional partnership as they collaborated on developing operational protocols that integrated APEX capabilities with conventional military support structures. Their work produced hybrid mission designs that combined Elena's unconventional insertion methods with traditional military logistics and intelligence gathering, creating operational approaches that were both revolutionary and practical. The first major test of these hybrid operations occurred when American hostages were taken by a terrorist group operating from a compound built into a cliff face in Afghanistan. Traditional rescue attempts would have been impossible due to the location's vertical access requirements and defensive positions that commanded all conventional approach routes. Elena designed an insertion plan that placed APEX-trained personnel directly into the compound through routes that defenders hadn't considered possible to use. The mission succeeded with all hostages recovered and minimal casualties among both rescue personnel and defenders. Elena's team inserted through cliff faces that appeared unclimbable, approached the compound through positions that defensive planning hadn't accounted for, and extracted through routes that pursuit forces couldn't follow. The operation demonstrated that APEX capabilities could achieve strategic objectives that conventional military planning classified as impossible. Elena's success prompted international attention from allied military organizations seeking to understand and potentially adopt similar training methods. British SAS representatives visited the Nevada facility to observe techniques that challenged their own understanding of special operations capabilities, while Israeli special forces personnel studied methods that could enhance their already legendary operational effectiveness. The international cooperation that developed around Elena's program created new opportunities for sharing advanced techniques while maintaining security protocols that protected the most sensitive capabilities from hostile intelligence services. Elena worked with allied trainers to develop modified versions of her methods that enhanced foreign military capabilities without compromising the full extent of American advantages in unconventional operations. Dr. Michael Foster, a physiologist studying human performance limits, joined the APEX program to understand the scientific principles underlying Elena's training methods. His research revealed that conventional understanding of human physical limitations was based on average capability rather than optimal potential, and that proper training could expand performance parameters far beyond what traditional military doctrine considered possible. Foster's work documented specific physiological adaptations that Elena's training produced, including cardiovascular efficiency improvements that enabled sustained physical performance at levels that would exhaust conventionally trained personnel within minutes. His research also revealed neurological changes that enhanced spatial awareness, decision-making speed, and stress tolerance to degrees that bordered on superhuman capability. The scientific validation of Elena's methods attracted research funding from agencies interested in understanding how human performance could be optimized for extreme applications. Elena found herself working with aerospace engineers studying pilot capabilities for next-generation aircraft, marine biologists researching human adaptation to underwater environments, and space program developers interested in human performance in zero-gravity conditions. Elena's work with space program researchers proved particularly fascinating as many of the challenges facing astronauts paralleled problems she'd solved for extreme environment operations. Her techniques for maintaining orientation without external reference points translated directly to zero-gravity navigation, while her methods for psychological conditioning under extreme stress proved applicable to the isolation and danger of space missions. The NASA collaboration resulted in training protocols that enhanced astronaut capabilities for emergency situations while providing Elena with new perspectives on human adaptation that she incorporated into military applications. The cross-pollination between space program requirements and special operations needs produced innovations that advanced both fields beyond what either could have achieved independently. Elena's reputation within classified circles grew to legendary status as stories of Apex program successes spread through intelligence and military communities. Personnel who had worked with Apex-trained operators reported capabilities that seemed impossible to those who hadn't witnessed them firsthand, creating a mystique around Elena's methods that enhanced their psychological impact on both allied and hostile forces. The psychological warfare applications of Elena's program became apparent when intelligence sources reported that hostile organizations were specifically developing countermeasures for capabilities they couldn't fully understand. Enemy forces began implementing defensive procedures designed to prevent insertion, methods that they knew existed but couldn't effectively predict or counter, creating strategic advantages that extended far beyond the actual deployment of Apex personnel. Elena's influence on military thinking produced doctrinal changes that emphasized human potential development over equipment dependence, fundamentally altering how American forces approached difficult missions. Training programs throughout the military began incorporating elements of Elena's philosophy, teaching soldiers to maximize human capability rather than relying primarily on technological solutions to tactical challenges. The cultural shift Elena produced within special operations communities created new expectations for what elite personnel could accomplish when properly trained and motivated. Standards for special operations selection and training increased dramatically as commanders realized that CONVENTIONO understanding of human limitations had been artificially constraining military capability development. Elena's personal evolution, from hidden medical officer to revolutionary trainer, reflected broader changes in how military organizations approached innovation and capability development. Her success demonstrated that breakthrough capabilities often emerged from challenging fundamental assumptions rather than incrementally improving existing methods, encouraging more radical thinking throughout defense research and development communities. The Apex Initiative's expansion included establishing satellite training facilities in diverse environments that provided students with experience in different operational contexts. Elena oversaw construction of specialized training sites in Arctic conditions, desert environments, and maritime settings, each designed to push human adaptation to specific environmental challenges that conventional training couldn't address. Elena's Arctic training facility taught students to function effectively in conditions where conventional equipment would fail due to extreme cold, developing techniques for maintaining body temperature and manual dexterity that enabled complex operations in environments that would incapacitate normally equipped personnel. Students learned to construct shelter and obtain water using only materials available in frozen landscapes, developing survival capabilities that enabled extended operations without supply support. The desert training facility focused on heat, adaptation, and water conservation techniques that enabled personnel to operate in conditions where conventional military operations would be impossible due to temperature and hydration requirements. Elena's methods taught students to regulate body temperature through breathing and movement techniques, while developing extraordinary efficiency in water usage that enabled survival in environments where traditional military doctrine required extensive logistical support. Elena's maritime training facility developed underwater capabilities that exceeded anything previously achieved by military divers, teaching students to navigate and function effectively in aquatic environments where conventional equipment would be detected or would fail due to depth, temperature, or chemical conditions. Students learned to approach targets through underwater routes that defensive planning hadn't considered, executing operations that appeared impossible to conventional thinking. The success of Elena's diverse training environments attracted students from specialized units throughout the military, each seeking capabilities tailored to their specific operational requirements. Elena worked with representatives from units she'd never heard of, developing techniques for missions that challenged her own understanding of what human beings could be asked to accomplish in service of national security. Elena's work with classified units often required her to develop new training methods for scenarios that pushed even her understanding of human capability limits. She created techniques for surviving in chemical environments where protective equipment would be detected, developed insertion methods for nuclear facilities where conventional approach routes would trigger automated defenses, and taught navigation techniques for underground facilities where GPS signals couldn't penetrate. The expansion of Elena's influence throughout the intelligence community created opportunities for cooperation with civilian agencies whose mission requirements differed significantly from military applications. Elena worked with researchers, studying human performance in extreme environments, developing techniques that advanced both national security capabilities and scientific understanding of human adaptation potential. Elena's collaboration with civilian researchers produced innovations that benefited both military and civilian applications, including medical techniques for treating personnel who had been subjected to extreme environmental stresses and rehabilitation, methods for individuals recovering from trauma sustained during high-stress operations. Her work contributed to advances in emergency medicine, sports performance, and rehabilitation therapy that extended far beyond military applications. The long-term impact of Elena's program became apparent as Apex-trained personnel assumed leadership positions throughout special operations communities, spreading her philosophy and methods through training programs and operational planning at all levels. Elena's influence multiplied as her students became instructors themselves, creating a generational change in how American military forces approached difficult missions. Elena's legacy extended beyond specific techniques to encompass a fundamental shift in thinking about human potential and military capability that influenced defense planning at the highest levels. Her demonstration that conventional limitations could be transcended through proper training and determination created new expectations for what American forces could accomplish when facing seemingly impossible challenges. The woman who had once hidden her capabilities behind a facade of medical officer timidity had become the architect of a revolution in military thinking that redefined what human beings could achieve when properly trained and motivated. Elena Novak's name would never appear in public military records, but her influence on American defense capabilities would protect national security interests for generations to come. Elena's story demonstrated that true capability often exists far beyond conventional understanding, waiting for the right circumstances and determination to reveal what human potential can actually achieve when properly directed and supported. Her journey from hidden asset to revolutionary trainer prove that sometimes the most significant advances come from those willing to challenge fundamental assumptions about what's possible. The Apex initiative continued expanding under Elena's leadership, developing capabilities that pushed human performance into realms that conventional wisdom had declared impossible. Her methods would train thousands of personnel who would accomplish missions that traditional military doctrine couldn't even contemplate, protecting American interests through capabilities that enemies couldn't predict or counter. Elena's transformation from someone supposedly afraid of parachutes to the architect of revolutionary military capabilities became a classified legend within special operations communities, inspiring new generations of warriors to question conventional limitations and seek the extraordinary potential that exists within properly trained and motivated human beings. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.